You know, one of the things that you mentioned to me that we might talk about was what makes a good section.
Absolutely,
You know?
and no one knows better than you.
Well, it takes, you know, first of all, respect and kindness and openness to your colleagues. It's an attitude. Your attitude is one of the biggest things you can have in your entire musical life. A good attitude, positive attitude, always trying to stay as fresh as you can. Life has a lot of ups and downs in it. We're in a kind of a down period, so we're all getting a big taste of, you know, something quite difficult to go through. But there are our own personal things that we go through that are difficult, and you come out the other side, and you have to make sure that that very precious part of you that loves music, you nurture and you keep away from any kind of darkness or cynicism. I think cynicism is one of the dangers of musicians, you know, as they get older, to try not to get into that frame of mind and always keep it beautiful and fresh and loving it. But you have to be conscious of it. Don't just expect that it's by itself it's going to do that. Be aware of how precious it is.
It's so true what you're saying. I just wanted to ask you if you had any tips for any people, young people, on how to sort of stay positive and focused and keep practicing and not losing that focus at the moment.
Yeah, you know, I think one thing you could do would be to make a list of of things you want to do every day on the flute and or with music, because you don't necessarily have to be playing the instrument all of the time in order to progress. You can, you know, say, okay, I'm going to do an hour, 30 minutes of it is going to be on, you know, tonal exercises and scales, arpeggios, then, you know, another, you know, half an hour or 45 minutes on some, you know, really good etudes, but taking breaks, mind you, got to take breaks. And then another hour, say, I'm going to listen to this piece and this piece. This week, my goal is to listen to two Beethoven symphonies. And you sit down, if you have the score, that's great, but if not, just really listen and try to listen to all the parts that are going on at the same time, because you need to train your ears for not just your own singular playing, but to hear everyone else. And that's one of the big keys of playing chamber music or orchestral music. So it's good to get your ears well trained.
It's so interesting you say that, because even, you know, I was so fortunate because I was a student and you always set me goals, and that in between lessons really kept me going as a young person. And even now myself, being in lockdown, I've not left my house for 3 months. I've actually been setting myself goals, taking out music that I've not looked at for years, or just relearning, or exactly what you're saying, taking recordings and listening to them and being really passionate, I think, about what we're doing. And I think reflecting on why we want to be musicians, it sort of brings you back to the authentic reasons, I think, why we love music.
Yes.
You were with the New York Philharmonic for many years. I mean, you came out of Juilliard, you went straight into the New York Phil. How was that? I mean, was that overwhelming, or was it exciting?
Exciting. It was interesting because the audition was announced my last year at Juilliard. And so all of us at school were saying, oh my gosh, you know, wouldn't it be fantastic to play with Mr. Baker in the New York Philharmonic? And so everyone was practicing as hard as they could. So many of us were taking the audition along with, you know, everyone else in the country. And in February of that year, the auditions were in August, but February before that, my flute was stolen off the subway. I was carrying it, and somebody had reached into my bag and stolen it. It was a beautiful Powell flute that my parents had bought for me. And it just, I called the police and we couldn't find it. I had an orchestra concert that night at school. And I called my teacher. I borrowed a friend's flute for that concert, but I called my teacher, Mr. Baker, Julius Baker, and he said, meet me at the hall tomorrow morning and I'll loan you one of my flutes. And he loaned me this beautiful, beautiful flute, Powell flute. And after playing on it for a little while, I said, oh, Mr. Baker, would you sell me this flute? And he said, I'll sell you that flute if you get a job in an orchestra. And up until then, I had not really had a big focus on playing in an orchestra. I loved playing chamber music, and with flute and piano chamber music, and with more instruments. I loved that. That I felt really comfortable doing. And but I thought, well, there's no way on earth that I can win this audition. But if I make a good showing, perhaps he'll say, okay, she did all right, and I'll sell her the instrument. That was my thinking. So I took the audition, and I had a good couple of days for the preliminary and the final, and no one was more shocked than I, although I felt very comfortable playing. I want to back up because this also has to do with everyone who takes auditions.
Yeah.
One of the things that I tell my students at the Manhattan School of Music, where I teach an orchestra repertory class, which is usually only has 2 to 4 flute players in it, and I divide them up into a section, first and second flute. So I have 2 sections, and they take auditions, and I say to them all the time, make sure that you're still playing solo music, that you're still playing chamber music, schedule concerts, play in front of people, play whole pieces in front of people. When we play these orchestral excerpts, we're playing these little mini, 6 measures, 4 measures, 16. We have to play the whole thing and keep our creative juices, our own things going in our head as far as interpretation. So I was doing a lot of that my last 2 years at Juilliard, and I think that helped me, as well as figuring I'm just I'm a dark horse in this race, for this job. So, I'll just go in and have a good time, and that's the way I'll play. And I did. I really enjoyed it. My audition was with Boulez, Pierre Boulez, and the final audition. And there was some sight reading. There was a Messiaen oiseau exotique that he had people sight read. He had sight read, be prepared, the last movement of Bartók Concerto for Orchestra.
Oh my
It's a
God.
tutti part with violin. It's all with violins. It's
I
nothing
know that
solo.
piece. It's
But
horrific.
it's fast. Yeah.
My God.
So, in other words, don't just learn the solos. Learn the entire part of your for an audition.
That's incredible.
But I think
Mind
also
me asking how old you were then? You were so...
I was I turned 24 in September of that year. That was I was 23 August 24. Yeah.
Your life is very strange how it works. In a sense, you must have been so sad to lose, because an instrument's such a personal thing to us. But yet, do you in some ways feel that your flute being stolen led you down this path and led you to the New York Philharmonic? Perhaps had you not have had your flute stolen, this wouldn't have been your destiny.
Oh, I never thought of it. When I started to play on this other Powell flute of Mr. Baker's, I immediately forgot about my old flute. I said, wow, this is the flute I want. So having that taken from me, it didn't affect me as much as you would think. I mean, only in retrospect, Lisa, could I look back and say, oh yeah, well, maybe that was an impetus. I think I would have had the same attitude because, as I said, I was not interested in playing in orchestras that much. So I wasn't keeping up on orchestral rep as my teacher had wanted me to. I have to admit I was not such a good student when that came to that, but I was doing a lot of solo work outside the school, and I was having a ball doing that. But when it came time and I realized, okay, I'm taking this audition, I was going to a festival in Marlborough, Vermont, the Marlborough Music Festival, which is all chamber music. But I had an apartment, and every day I had a routine of how to practice those excerpts, and I did every single one of them like 5 times every day in the order that of this list. And the rote repetition of that I was counting on to get me through for nerves, because these auditions can be nerve-wracking, but that's another thing, that's another topic on how to deal with being nervous for orchestra or regular, a normal concert. But I think being super prepared with repetition trains your muscles so that if you're starting to think about something else, which is what nerves can do to you while you're playing, your body just takes over and plays to a certain extent. Of course, it's better to just be really involved with how beautiful the music is that you're playing, which is a great way to deal with nerves. Don't think about anybody who's listening. You just think about playing this gorgeous music and enjoy just wanting to give this beautiful sound and experience to the people who are listening.
And how, blending in a section, you have, the section of the New York Philharmonic, I don't think you get better. You have worked with, I think, the greatest. You are one of the greatest. How have you found that?
Well, it was very interesting getting the job with my teacher. And he was probably one of the greatest orchestral flute players of the 20th century. And I learned so much sitting next to him. I was almost going to say so much more than just in lessons with him, but when you're sitting next to him, he would not always, but sometimes he would turn, he would say, your vibrato is faster than mine in this passage, or your notes are longer than mine, or shorter, or we'd be playing and he'd have his flute up. And if he wanted to hear me more, he'd take one hand off his flute and give me a sign like, more, like he'd wave his hand up. And, it was good. It helped me to be very sensitive, much more sensitive than I had been, even with all the chamber music I had done. I thought, my gosh, there's so much here, I really need to pay attention to. And that's why I was talking about, being in the orchestra, a few minutes ago, and not in the orchestra, but listening this week when you want to practice, you out there, flute students, make sure you listen every day to a recording. Put your flute away and really listen. Don't just look around and think about your friends. Really listen and try to imagine that you're seeing the score.
That's a great.
And that will open up your ears more and more. You have to train your ears. So he was training my ears. And he was very encouraging.
Must have become, by the end, you must have become almost entwined, that it was like just an instinctive, automatic feeling.
Oh, yeah.
You were so linked. And I guess with each player that you've played with over the years, that it's such a relationship that you become blended together.
Yes, well, when Jeannie Baxtresser came into the orchestra, it was such a completely different relationship. Mm-hmm. Julius Baker had been my teacher, and then suddenly he was not Mr. Baker anymore, but he was Julie. And here I was, just turned 24, and I'm thinking, okay, this revered flutist, and now I'm going to call him by his first name. I mean, back in those days, and I'm from the South, it was Mr. and Mrs. and that's what you did. You didn't call adults by their first name.
No.
So that was kind of a psychological, thing to get over. And then Jeannie came in, and Jeannie was so kind and respectful. To her, I was principal second flute. and Mindy was principal piccolo. She really thought so highly of each position that we were all, equal, and therefore, equal respect, equal playing, and she was like a sister to me, and so we had a great time. She's got a wonderful sense of humor also, and her playing is a little bit more delicate than Julie's. Julie liked a very masculine, beefy sound, especially in the low register, and his high register was just, to hear him play Beethoven symphonies, you just were just absolutely in awe. Beethoven is very, very hard to play, flute players. Good to study Beethoven symphony flute parts. They're not easy to play. Anyway, Jeannie had a beautiful, delicate way of phrasing. So I had to try to learn what her style was, because that's my job, is second, to blend into her, to help support her. Then Robert comes along. Now he is from much more the European school. Robert Langevin. He's from Canada, French Canada.
Wonderful.
And, huh?
He's a wonderful player.
He's a wonderful player.
And a wonderful man. He's
a sweetheart. Oh, we had so much fun. Oh my God, we laughed so much. We actually got, Lauren Moselle was the music director after Mazur left. And Robert came in right at the end of Mazur and beginning of Moselle. And he and I would crack up so much that at one point Robert said, oh, Moselle came over to me and said, a little too much frivolity in the flute section. So we had to put a mask on it or something. But he was a lot of fun. Very different school of playing.
It's so interesting. You've had such different players.
Oh boy.
But that is, for you to be able to do that, what a skill. And you still doing all of this work in the New York Phil, you still kept your solo career, your chamber career going, your teaching. How did you manage all that?
I don't know. No, that's not true. You work hard. You just, people ask you, not me necessarily, they'll ask, a professional musician, a soloist, and they'll just tell you, work. You work. That's what it's about. But there's so much pleasure in that work. The concerts are wonderful and nice, but the real meat is the rehearsing, and you rehearse with your trio, you rehearse with your pianist, or you rehearse with your colleagues in the orchestra. It's just, those are the best times, I think, the work.
Do you have you've worked with the greatest conductors, but is there one in particular that you have particularly fond memories, who you felt musically made the orchestra into something beyond?
Well, I loved Leonard Bernstein. I'll never forget, we were doing Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. This was my first look on stage at Bernstein on the podium. And so I must have been, I don't know, maybe I was 25 then, 26.
I think my dad was there then.
Yes. And we were doing Tchaikovsky 5, and the orchestra still had a lot of older players in it. I would say that 65, 70% of the orchestra was already in their 60s, 50s and 60s. And they knew Lenny when he was a nobody, from when before he made his debut. He was doing things, I guess maybe doing some rehearsals, but then he jumped up and had the famous concert that he got the great review, and he was the next coming of, great conductors. And so to these guys, he was still little Lenny, little Lenny Bernstein, and they were all joking around with him. It was a real sort of funny experience. And I'm going, but wait a minute, this is Leonard Bernstein. Wow. But I'm watching these guys and I think, oh, that's great. They're enjoying him and they're yucking it up. And then he started that first movement. And by the time we got to the end, his conducting was something which you felt as though he was looking at every single person in the orchestra and reaching out to them and pulling them with him. It's a physical sensation. It's a very hard thing to describe, much like answering the question, what does a conductor do?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at Bernstein, if you played an instrument in an orchestra, you would feel that power that some of them have. Very few, but some do have it. That lets you know that he wants to hear more of you. He wants this to be less. He wants things that I can't even put into words because it's on his face, it's in his body. It's somehow so ingrained in his brain that it's coming through his eyes. I don't know, and I'm sure this sounds crazy to people, especially who are not musicians, but it is something that cannot be taught. And Bernstein had it to the nth degree. And by the end of that first movement, I thought I was going to jump out of my seat. You know, I was so, like, yes, I just was so into Tchaikovsky, and every time he came to conduct us, that's the way he was. He couldn't be any way else. That was him to the core. He wasn't putting it on. It wasn't artificial. That was him. And so it made it always wonderful and eye-opening.
What a gift. I mean, I watch videos on YouTube and of those days, and actually have little memories being there as a child watching you all. But yeah. I wish, if I had a dream, I sort of wish I could be an adult watching it now, because when you're a young kid, you have no idea what you're watching. You don't realize, and just those amazing memories. But I try and watch it all on as much as I can on YouTube and try and just pick up that energy and it's just something else.
Do you remember how old you were when you first saw him conducting any?
Yeah, so I was about 6.
That's very young. Yeah.
So I think because it was when I met you as a child. Yes. Very, very young.
Yes. And your impression of him, did he look like kind of a crazy man jumping up and down on the podium, or what kind of impression?
I thought he was amazing, but I know my father adored him so much. He was so loved, and that's all. I think when you're a child, you pick up on that energy as well. When you're a child, the beauty is you don't know if you don't know if someone's well known. You don't know any different. But I just wish sometimes, I just think, oh my God, what I was listening to as a little child, and if only I could now hear that again in adulthood.
Yes, yes.
What a blessing.
Yes. Well, like you say, there are recordings that you can watch, but it's not the same thing. Nothing like live.
And tell me, did you always feel the flute? What brought you to the flute? Is it always the instrument that you wanted, or was playing to you any instrument an expression of emotion, of feeling, or was it the actual flute that you really fell in love with?
Well, to tell you the truth, my father was very sort of bent upon both of his daughters having, a focus. And my sister was a pianist, and she had been playing since she was 6 years old. And I was about 11 or 12 when he said, okay, what are you got to find something for you to do. What do you want to do? And I saw a flute on the playground, and it was in the pretty box with the velvet, and it was silver. It looked like jewelry, or something precious.
A box.
And my friend whose flute it was, she put it together for me, and we just sort of played around. I didn't know what to do with it. She was just a beginner, but it was that. So I went home and I said, okay, get me a flute. And that Christmas, there was a flute under the tree, and the man at the music store had shown my dad about how you blow over the hole like it's a Coke bottle, and to get a sound, and this is where you put your fingers. So the whole family, my aunts, my uncles, my cousin, were all passing flute around,
Incredible.
trying to play the sound. And I remember from the get-go just getting the sound that day. I was just like, oh, here's the sound, you know. And maybe I'd already blown over so many Coke bottles I knew what to do.
That's such a beautiful story. That's amazing.
Yeah. But later on,
did you know that was your path? Did you know that was it for you?
No. I just thought, well, I'll give that a try. It looks pretty. I wasn't really sure what it. I knew that it was probably a higher pitched, instrument. I had been not very good at piano. They of course had tried me on piano, and I just couldn't do two different things with my hands. So I thought, well, okay, I'll try the flute. Something led me. I was not in control. Something brought me to it.
Is there if you hadn't have been a flute player, do you think there's another instrument? I mean, if you could play something else, is there an instrument you really love?
Oh yeah, I play one of the string instruments. And you know why? Yeah. Well, I remember being over at Pinky Zuckerman's apartment, I should say. His kids were super young. I think one of them was having a birthday.
Yeah.
He had his violin out, and his wife Jeannie was there, and of course she's also a flute player. And he said, well, you flute players, you can't do this. And he went from the top down to the bottom and just played these low notes that were so rich and gorgeous. And Jeannie, I think, was like, wow, wait a minute, and I'm like, oh man, you aren't kidding. I love that. There's a richness and the range. Secondly, the repertoire.
Yeah.
All that incredible chamber music. Oh my gosh. The solo stuff is great, but the chamber music, oh my, who wouldn't want to play those quartets and trios and quintets? Oh, that is the best repertoire. I would love to play that. That's hot stuff. Oh, I think playing an instrument is like meditating. Yeah,
I mean, through this lockdown, I think we're quite lucky as musicians because, I've been thinking, I think I'd be going out of my mind, the fact that I've been able to at least practice, teach my students online. I mean, how that's been a blessing just to keep the old mind a bit sane.
Yes.
And as you say, have challenges each week. Do you think the internet has changed music a lot?
Well, I think the internet, as you just pointed out, I mean, the only way that we can talk to people now, or teach, is on the internet. So for that, it's very valuable. And I know families that are getting together via Zoom once a week and, having a wonderful time in that way, the best they can. I think that there's a lot of distraction when it comes to cell phones and, the computers. And I think that I think people have to be very, very careful of not wasting their time on it. Use it for something specific, but then get off of it. Don't just start in the morning or in the afternoon, because you can get in, what do they call it? Just surfing the net.
Yeah, totally.
And 5 hours later, you're still doing it. And what have you done? You haven't done anything in your life except that.
Yeah.
I think you have to be careful about that. And I think that it's also important to not do that because you stop thinking deeply. Mm-hmm. It's really, really important to not take verbatim that's anything that you might read, on the internet is the truth. If you want to find out, okay, you read something or you hear something on television, look it up, but don't just go to one source. You can use it like that as well, which is, try to get more deeply into whatever topic it is. Look to find out all the facts that you possibly can, both sides of whatever it is that you're looking at. I think it can be good for that. I hate that there's anonymity on it. I think has bred a terrible, brought out terrible characteristics in people that have those characteristics, of being cruel and never signing their names. I think that part of it is not good. But I think I just would be cautionary, and just don't be on it so much.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, even myself, if I'm practicing, I put the phone away because it's just too tempting to have a look. And it's so distracting. The minute you hear that ping, you're sort of gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes away that focus.
Yeah. It's almost like an addiction, something is beckoning to you, come and do this, and with the little sounds that it makes. And it's, you have to really resist it.
I mean, I didn't have it when I studied with you. There was nothing like this. And in a sense, when I came to New York and I was studying with you, I would speak to my mum, and it was a call, or I would get a fax. And even though I miss my family so much, but at the same time, the time was spent focusing on what I needed to do. And I was in New York for a reason, to be with you, to learn what I could from you.
What year was that?
My gosh, 88.
88? Okay.
So yeah, it's a long time.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about you this morning, and being over here, you were staying with friends of your family in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But what was that like for you to be away from your family and suddenly, you're with another family and trying to...
It was really hard, but I wanted to be a flute player, and I knew I had to come and study with you.
Yeah.
I just needed to be, hearing your sound, which I always say to my own students, it's about the sound. You've got to be near that sound. You've got to be next to the sound. And I had that amazing teaching from such a young age, and I knew my parents sacrificed a lot to send me over. I was so young, but I just think, had I have had phones and maybe technology was different, I might have not had that same focus. So it was a very special time.
Yes. Yeah, speaking of sound, I know that when Robert, he's Canadian, but for at least 1 year, maybe 2, I'm not sure, he went over to Europe and studied with Nicolai. And he felt the same way about his sound. And he would just listen to him and try to imagine that sound in his own body, in his own head. And, Robert Langevin understands about that is the core, that is the key of your expression. And to know intimately every single note on your instrument is the greatest palette that we have. You've got like an artist, colors that you have available to you, and you've got to practice it. Use your imagination. That's the other thing. I think there's a wonderful...
While you're on that topic, which reminds me, that is, how do you stop students from mimicking? Obviously, they want to learn from their teachers, but yet you have to keep an individuality. So, i.e., when you're listening to a student, when you're on a panel, what are you looking for?
Well, I think if I heard you right, you're asking me about students copying or mimicking.
Yes, maintaining one's own flavor and style, yet studying with someone to hear that sound, but yet not trying to be that person, if you get what I'm saying.
I don't believe that there is that much of a danger of you having that person sound so completely that you don't have your own.
Yeah.
But there is a great positive, there's a lot to be gained from trying to do that sound, because it opens up, again, your ears and your mind to something that is of a higher level. If it's a great player, you gotta try to make that kind of sound. And once you do, then it allows you to have that capability to develop your own sound, because the sound, you become very intimate in a technical way when you're just doing tonal exercises, say. But when you're applying it to a piece of music, there's no way that it's only going to be you interpreting what these phrases mean, and what the composer wants, and the feeling that you want to have put across. But now you have the tools of the sound to be able to do it with. So I say, go ahead and try to copy a great sound. Try to copy a great sound. I tried to actually also copy Ron Paul's sound.
Right.
You know, because there was something that was so bright and sparkly about his sound, and I could do it. I could get there, but it wasn't the sound that I wanted if I was playing something like Hindemith, you know, or you know, something later. Baroque music, it was great.
Yeah.
That kind of sound was great. Vibrato.
You see, going back to Julius Baker, I remember going to his school in Connecticut when I was about 14, and playing and listening to that wonderful sound. But I think in a sense I was too young to really understand what he was doing. And I don't think because it was so instinctive to him that he could verbally translate to a young person what he was doing. Yeah, no, he couldn't. And, you know, even when you're older and you're, say, you know, a level of Juilliard student, you're not technically looking, or at least I wasn't. I was just listening and then trying to reproduce, listening, reproduce, listening, reproduce, on every single note. But I had also, before I ever got to Juilliard, I don't know why. You know, who knows what leads us? Who knows what led you to me? You know, you were 6 years old, or you were 15 or 16, whatever it was, 14, and you said, I have one to go and study with her. Well, why? Where did that come from? You know, why did I like sound so much? I don't know. All I know is that I loved playing one note at a time and trying to do from, you know, different dynamics and different vibrato speeds and colors. I would sometimes think, I want this to be a happy sound, or I want this to be a, you know, this kind of sound. I want this. And I would just try to think it and put it into the sound. That's what I did. It was like a game for me. So when I hit Juilliard and I'm hearing Julie's sound, which was not, you know, it was not far off from what I was wanting, you know, to get in a certain area, you know, of his sound, that darkness, and that, you know, is like a plum. Every note was just so juicy, berry-like. And so it helps me now. I've got that to hear, and especially when I joined the orchestra. But we were a good match in the orchestra, and I think the sound was what, I know the sound is what got me into Juilliard. I mean, he told me, he said, I've not heard a sound like that, you know. So, and so, you know, we matched in that regard. I want to just tell this one little short story. It was maybe my third year in the orchestra, and Arthur Rubenstein was playing with us, and he was performing one of the Brahms piano concertos, where in the second movement, the slow movement, at the end, there are two notes that second flute plays by itself. And then at the piano and the different instruments are doing this layer, but I think the second flute might be the first one that does that. And Rubenstein came back into the section at the break, and he said, those two notes are the sun coming up. Oh. And I was like, yes, okay, I hear, you know, I love having imagery like that in playing. Yeah. And composers give you tons of imagery. I mean, the composers are laying it on, you know, but it was interesting to hear, you know, that little statement was very telling and descriptive. It was a beautiful thing to say. And an incredible compliment. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful to hear, probably. Yeah, well, yeah, it was fun. It was,
It was.
I wanted to ask you, because you were with the New York Phil for so long, what's it like for you now when you go to a concert and you're sat in the audience and you're what? I mean, do you feel like, oh my God, that's my chair? Or, do you feel like you're playing, or do you feel like, how does it feel?
The first couple of years or a year, I would go and I would be taking breaths. It not all the time, but you know, I would hear something and then I would breathe, you know, or I would count measures a little bit, you know. It was like, wow, this is crazy, you know. And but that didn't last that long. But then secondly, because I knew everybody up there so well, that I would sit and I wasn't really listening to the music. I was looking at all the people that I knew and their stories, and I know their families, or I knew and I'm just thinking about them, and I'm not listening to the concert. So then I realized I have to close my eyes and just listen to the music, and that solved my whole problem.
How amazing. I mean, it must have almost felt in the interval that you needed to go up the stairs to your dressing room.
Oh gosh, no, it was, you know, and I love music so much. I love listening to it, and so it's just as much of a thrill. 37 years in the orchestra was a blessing, and it was plenty for me. And so now I get a chance to sit back and close my eyes and get thrilled again, because the orchestra is sounding magnificent these days.
Yeah, and I hope, please God, it's not going to be too long till we can hear them and attend concerts again.
Yeah.
Life will return to some normality. All these wonderful musicians.
Yes, but in the meantime, you know, make your every Monday I'm going to practice this, Tuesday and listen to this, and Tuesday I'm going to do this, you know, and there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of carryover, but have a little schedule for yourself with wonderful breaks where you can sit and maybe read a chapter in a book. Don't get on the internet. But
Renee, it's been so gorgeous to catch up with you, and just amazing to hear all your stories and experiences, and you know, I still listen to all your recordings, and I've got your beautiful books, and you know, I feel so privileged that you've given me this gift of wanting to play the flute, and the incredible things I've learned from you. So thank you so much.
Well, Lisa, I love you too, and you are like one of my daughters, you know, to me. I mean, I've known you for so long, and I feel so close to you and feel so simpatico with you. So this has been fun. I'm really happy to have had this talk with you.
Me too. I've loved it, and hopefully, you know, a lot of flute players are going to really benefit from so many of the fabulous things that you've said today. So thank you, Renee. And
you're very welcome.